The insistent buzzing of his alarm clock dragged Richard Gonzalez from slumber. He slammed his hand down on the snooze button, momentarily forgetting the day's importance. He was already running late for school. The urgency of the morning was palpable, and the weight of his senior year responsibilities pressed heavily on his mind. His senior year, filled with dreams of college and a future bright with promise, was supposed to be a time of excitement and anticipation. He had spent countless hours poring over college brochures, daydreaming about the possibilities that lay ahead. Now all those dreams seemed trivial in the face of his tardiness. As Richard reluctantly peeled himself from the comfort of his bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Suddenly a tremor shook the room. It wasn't the gentle sway of an earthquake, but a violent, jarring jolt. It threw him off balance, sending him stumbling back onto the bed. The intensity of the shake was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He sat there for a moment, heart pounding, unsure of what had just transpired. His mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Curiosity overriding his fear, Richard stumbled towards his window. He needed to understand what was happening outside. He pulled back the curtains, expecting to see the familiar sight of his suburban street, the quiet tree-lined avenue where he had grown up. Instead, he was met with a scene straight out of a horror movie. The tranquility of his neighborhood had been shattered. His once peaceful neighborhood had descended into chaos. People were running in every direction, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Their faces were contorted in terror, eyes wide with fear. The air was thick with the sounds of panic and confusion. Cars collided with each other in a cacophony of screeching metal and shattering glass. The once orderly street was now a scene of utter destruction. And then he saw them, the walking corpses, their eyes vacant, their mouths stained crimson. Zombies. The stuff of nightmares had become his reality, and he was right in the middle of it. Richard stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. His mind struggled to reconcile the horrifying reality unfolding before him with the normalcy of just moments ago. The dead were walking, their hunger insatiable, their touch a death sentence. A primal fear, raw and consuming, surged through him. He was living a nightmare. The world he knew, the future he had envisioned, all of it seemed to crumble around him. Suddenly the urgency of the situation hit him. His family. Were they safe? Were they even alive? He had to find out, had to make sure. Richard scrambled for his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed his father's number. The line was dead. He tried his mother, his sister, even his best friend, Mark. Each attempt was met with the same chilling silence. Panic clawed at Richard's chest, threatening to consume him. His family, his friends, were they all gone? Victims of the horrifying plague sweeping through his city? He refused to believe it. He had to find them, had to know for sure. Turning on the television, Richard was met with a barrage of static and distorted images. He frantically flipped through the channels, each one filled with the same chaotic scenes. Finally, a news report broke through the static. The news anchor, his face pale and voice trembling, confirmed his worst fears. It wasn't just their city, the outbreak was global. Millions were already dead, transformed into flesh-eating monsters. The world was on the brink of collapse. Amidst the chaos and despair, a single thought pierced through Richard's fear: Lisa. His little sister, just 15 years old, was alone, vulnerable. He had to reach her, had to protect her. She was his family now, and he would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. A plan began to form in Richard's mind, fueled by adrenaline and a brother's love. He knew Lisa would likely head home if something was wrong. Their house, their childhood haven, would be her first instinct, and that's where he would find her. He grabbed his backpack, stuffing it with essentials, bottled water, canned food, a first aid kit. His father's old baseball bat, a memento he had always cherished, now felt reassuringly heavy in his hands. It was a poor weapon against the undead, but it was all he had. Taking a deep breath, Richard steeled himself for the horrors that awaited him outside. He knew that every step he took could be his last, but the thought of Lisa, alone and terrified, propelled him forward. He had to reach her, had to know she was safe. As he cautiously opened his front door, the stench of decay hit him with full force. The air was thick with the smell of rotting flesh, a grim reminder of the horrors that now roamed the streets. He gripped his bat tighter, his heart pounding against his ribs. A guttural moan, low and menacing, sent chills down Richard's spine. He turned, his blood running cold. It was Mr. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, his eyes milky white, his jaw slack, his hands outstretched. Mr. Henderson, who used to greet Richard with a warm smile and a grandfatherly pat on the head, was a fixture in the neighborhood, a symbol of kindness and wisdom. But now, he was a grotesque mockery of his former self, a twisted version of the man everyone once knew and loved. The man who had patiently taught Richard how to ride his bike, holding the seat and running alongside until Richard could balance on his own, who had shared his love of gardening, showing Richard how to plant seeds and nurture them into blooming flowers, was now a mindless, flesh-eating monster, driven by an insatiable hunger. Terror threatened to paralyze Richard, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum, but he knew he couldn't hesitate. He had to summon every ounce of courage he had. He had to act, had to defend himself against the horror that was once his friend. With a cry of both fear and determination, a primal scream that echoed his inner turmoil, he swung the bat with all his might, channeling his fear into raw strength. The sickening thud of wood connecting with bone echoed through the air, a sound that would haunt Richard forever. Mr. Henderson crumpled to the ground, his skull caved in, the life extinguished from his eyes. Richard stared at the body, his stomach churning, bile rising in his throat. He had never killed anything in his life, not even a bug, and the reality of what he had just done hit him with the force of a physical blow, leaving him reeling and gasping for breath. Nausea threatened to overwhelm Richard, but he pushed it down. He couldn't afford to break down, not now. Lisa needed him. Taking a shaky breath, he stepped over Mr. Henderson's body and out into the chaos. The streets were a maelstrom of panic and death. Cars, their horns blaring incessantly, sat abandoned, some still running. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the sound of distant screams. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare, and Richard was living it. He moved quickly, his senses on high alert, his bat held at the ready. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat, every corner a potential ambush. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a stark reminder of his own mortality. As he navigated the treacherous streets, Richard encountered others fighting for survival. Some like him were armed with makeshift weapons, their faces etched with fear and determination. Others were already infected, their eyes vacant, their movements jerky and unnatural. He witnessed acts of both incredible bravery and unspeakable horror. A young mother shielding her child from a horde of undead, her cries a mix of defiance and despair. A group of looters, their humanity lost in the face of chaos, fighting amongst themselves for scraps of food. Each encounter, each glimpse into this new, terrifying world, chipped away at Richard's hope. The world he knew was gone, replaced by a desolate landscape where survival was the only law. As the sun began its descent, casting long, eerie shadows over the ravaged city, Richard encountered a new horror. A group of zombies, their bodies twisted and mutated, their moans replaced by guttural growls, emerged from the shadows. These weren't the slow, lumbering corpses he had encountered before. These creatures were faster, stronger, their flesh a grotesque tapestry of boils and open sores. Their eyes, burning with a malevolent intelligence, seemed to track his every move. Richard had heard whispers of these mutated zombies, rumors circulating on the internet that he had dismissed as mere fantasy. Now, faced with their terrifying reality, he realized the true extent of the nightmare unfolding around him. Just when all hope seemed lost, a faint glimmer of light appeared in the distance. Richard's house. It stood amidst the chaos, a beacon of familiarity in a world gone mad. His heart surged with renewed determination. Lisa was close. He could feel it. As he approached his house, he saw her. Lisa. She was standing on the porch, her face pale with terror, frantically waving him forward. Relief washed over him, so profound it almost brought him to his knees. "Richard!" she screamed, her voice hoarse with fear and relief. "Thank God you're here!" Richard sprinted towards the house, dodging abandoned cars and shambling corpses, his eyes fixed on his sister. He would get to her. He would keep her safe. He had to. As Richard bundled Lisa inside, locking the door behind them, a high-pitched ringing pierced through the air. The tension in the room was palpable, every creak of the floorboards echoing their fear. It was his phone, vibrating violently in his pocket. The sound was almost alien in the eerie silence that had enveloped their surroundings. He pulled it out, his heart pounding. Who could be calling in this chaos? His mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but what caught his eye was the message flashing across the screen, Code Omega activated. It was a phrase he had never seen before, yet it sent chills down his spine. Before he could react, a robotic voice filled his ear. It was cold, mechanical, devoid of any emotion. "Richard Gonzalez," the voice boomed, "you have been chosen." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "Your mission, survive, seek out others like you, rebuild." The instructions were clear, yet the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. The line went dead, leaving Richard in stunned silence. The weight of the message settled on his shoulders, a burden he had no choice but to bear. He had no answers, only more questions. The unknown loomed large, casting a shadow over his thoughts. What was Code Omega? Who were these people? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more pressing than the last. And what did it mean to rebuild in a world overrun by the undead? The city outside was a ghost of its former self, a stark reminder of the world they had lost. One thing was certain, his life as he knew it was gone. The memories of a simpler time seemed like a distant dream. He was no longer just a teenager late for school. The responsibilities that now lay before him were far beyond anything he had ever imagined. He was Richard Gonzalez, a survivor, a protector, and now a soldier in a war he never asked to fight. The determination in his eyes was a testament to his resolve. His journey had just begun. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but he was ready to face it head-on, for he had a mission to complete and a world to rebuild.